May Jesus Christ be praised now and forever. And blessed Christmas to you all. Blessed Christmas season. We started Christmas a couple of days ago. It is generally accepted that the first gospel written is the gospel according to Mark. That gospel does not mention Bethlehem or the parents of Jesus or anything about his birth or Jesus' childhood. The story of Mark starts with baptism of Jesus, and yet Jesus is presented as Jesus the Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah, the Son of God. So the question soon after arose, after the gospel was written among the Gentile Christian communities and also Jewish Christians, as well as what is the connection of Jesus of Nazareth with Bethlehem, the town of David, where the Messiah was supposed to be born. Thus, the two Gospels were written more or less in the same time, Matthew, I believe, first, and then Luke, in the middle 80s of the first century, about 20 years after Mark's Gospel was written. These two Gospels give in their first two chapters, each one of them have two chapters devoted to that, some attention to the question that was raised. So where Jesus really came from? Where was he born? Why do you call him Messiah if he is really from Nazareth? To establish the messianic origin of Jesus was very important. While Matthew gives more prominence to Joseph in his narrative, Luke's is all about Mary, and Mary is important. Later on, when John wrote his gospel, he also, like Mark, does not mention Mary and Joseph. Also, he mentioned Mary in different situations at Jesus' birth. He doesn't mention the birth. When it looks like his earthly origin at those days were not so much important as his divine origin. And that is why in John's gospel, there is no mention of Nazareth, of his birth or childhood or Bethlehem, but that he was with God and he was God from the beginning. Imagine that this is the gospel for Christmas. No mention for Christmas Day. The gospel we had was the gospel of John, the prologue of John. And the only idea that refers to the Christmas story is John chapter 1, verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelled or pitched his tent among us. But this is the main gist of the incarnation story of Jesus. Now, Luke's gospel, on the other hand, presents a very some beautiful stories from just before and of the night Jesus was born, and also some events of his early childhood, his circumcision on the 8th day of his birth, the offering of in the temple later 40 days, and the finding of Jesus in the temple when he was 12 years old. The announcement of the king to be born is very important. Matthew also has some sort of announcement included, but not annunciation story like in Luke. There is simply an allusion to Prophet Isaiah, chapter 7, verse 14. The virgin will conceive a son and will name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. That's in Matthew. Now in Luke, instead, a special messenger from heaven, Gabriel, came first to a man, priest in the temple his name was Zechariah, to announce the birth of the messenger, John the Baptist. He named him John. He was later called the Baptist. And then an annunciation to Mary in the hill country of Nazareth in Galilee. While Mary accepted the message after clarification of the conception without a man, behold the handmaid of the Lord, she said. In case of Zechariah, he doubts God's messenger and remains dumb until the birth of John. There is also a duplicate story of the birth of John the Baptist and of Jesus. Yet Jesus is not born in Nazareth. but in Bethlehem, since Joseph was born of the house of David and had to go, as we know from Luke's Gospel, for the registration or census to the place of his birth. Between the Annunciation and the birth stories, there is a story of the visitation of Mary to Elizabeth. Both words of Annunciation and the words said to Mary by Elizabeth are very significant and are used, as I explained in my previous sessions long time ago, in a very popular Christian prayer called Hail Mary. But this also became a base for a very special theology we have of Mary, Mariology, from the very early Christianity. However, I am not sure if Luke knew the geography of Israel, because from Nazareth to Ein Karim, where John the Baptist was born, southwest of Jerusalem, is also, and also to Bethlehem, which is nearby, almost the same distance in the south of Jerusalem, is about 45 miles. And it is very dangerous and tedious journey on foot to make by a young pregnant woman, as she would make over, well, 150 miles or more just going to see Elizabeth and back, and then with Joseph to register in Bethlehem. It seems like Evangelist Luke, placing the Annunciation and the visitation of Elizabeth and the birth of Jesus all in space of 9 months, did not really know the geography and the distances that we are dealing with here, and the danger that a young teenage girl, pregnant, traveling alone without the father or the husband, would be exposed to in a very, it was in a very patriarchal society, a young woman alone. The last journey, of course, in the third trimester of her pregnancy, was done with Joseph. The circumcision and the naming of Jesus in Luke chapter 2, verse 21, on the eighth day, was usually done in the house of the newborn, as we can see in case of John the Baptist. If you read Luke chapter 1, verse 59 to 65, it was a time of a great rejoicing. So we hear that even the neighbors came to the house for that occasion. On that day of Jesus' circumcision, neighbors present are not mentioned, so they are not there. Since he was born in Bethlehem by a chance, yes, his real neighbors from Nazareth were not there. It would be much better for Luke to place the Annunciation also in Bethlehem and not in Nazareth, and it would be much easier to understand that Mary went to visit Elizabeth in Ein Karim, which is just over 8 kilometers or 5 miles from Bethlehem, even little closer than distance between Bethlehem and Jerusalem temple. Since there was another journey to Jerusalem temple for the purification of Mary stipulated in Leviticus, yes, in Leviticus, 40 days after Jesus' birth, was Jesus all this time in Bethlehem, or right of after circumcision, they went back to Nazareth to return again after 40 days. The continuous stay in Bethlehem for 6 weeks would be quite costly if Joseph really didn't have a house there. On the other hand, the distance between Bethlehem and Ein Karim, or Jerusalem, is only about 2-3 hours journey on foot, while the journey between Nazareth and Ein Karim, or Nazareth and Bethlehem, Ein Karim being the birthplace of John, would take a couple of days, at least, maybe even a week, on foot, of course. Today you can go within an hour or 2 hours between those places. Some 20 years ago, I did an extensive historical and biblical study related to the movements of Jesus doing during his lifetime, from Bethlehem to Nazareth, and after the death of Herod and the Great, from Nazareth to Capernaum, also around 28 AD. Joseph and his stepson Jesus were teknons. That's a Greek word for mason or builder, used in the gospel. That word, unfortunately, was translated into English as a carpenter or joiner, which we usually associate with a person who does furniture, etc., from wood. However, in my Polish language, for example, that word would be stolarz, somebody who does furniture. However, in Polish Bible, the description for Jesus and Joseph's profession is cieśla, somebody who builds house from wood. Completely different profession altogether from the professions like drwal, someone who cuts the wood in the forest, woodcutter or lumberjack in English, cieśla, who uses the wood to build big constructions, houses, palaces using wood, and stolarz, who does the furniture. Unfortunately, in English language, we only have carpenter to describe both professions. And thus, we end up seeing Joseph and a small boy Jesus in many pictures of childhood of Jesus, often depicted as a carpenter shop doing furniture. If Joseph and also then Jesus, who learned his trade in his early life, as the son always followed the father's profession, were indeed builders or masons, then they would follow the big building projects of the ancient Israel. The first such building project during the King Herod, during the birth of Jesus, would have been either the Jerusalem temple or the big city on the coast, Caesarea Maritima. These were the two big projects of Herod the Great that was on the coast of Mediterranean Sea. And there, well, Caesarea Maritima could be relatively close to Nazareth, but still about 45 kilometers away. And if Joseph lived at that time in Nazareth, it would be too difficult to commute on foot between these two places. It would be easier to commute daily or weekly, returning from for the Sabbath home between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Jerusalem temple was indeed a big building project of Herod the Great from the 19th year BC, so 19 year BC, until Herod's death, which is about 18 years later. The big construction was abandoned after Herod's death, about 2 BC. But on the one of his sons, who ruled Galilee, started to build a new capital for himself in Galilee, close to the hills which produce and still produce the best wine in the whole of the Holy Land. The capital, which was left unfinished in 28 AD, as it did not attract Romans as Herod Agrippa thought it would, he transferred the capital to Galilee, to Tiberias, by the shore of the Lake of Galilee, not so far again, just 8 kilometers from the little town Capernaum, where Jesus moved shortly before he was baptized in the River Jordan and then began his mission throughout Galilee, ending in Jerusalem, the Messianic mission. I should have mentioned that a little village of Nazareth with about maybe 400, 200 people at the time of Jesus was only just 5 kilometers from the building project of that first capital in Galilee, Zippori. We never mentioned Zippori, yet Jesus knows about the hypocrites who were probably, he was building the theater there and so on. So these historical facts of death of Herod the Great, when Jesus was about 4 or 5 years old, made Joseph to look for a new building project in Galilee and move with his family there, with his mother, with Jesus' mother, and of course with Jesus. And when that project abruptly ended in around 28 AD, maybe Joseph was not alive anymore, Jesus himself goes and transfers himself near the capital of Tiberias, which was supposed to be built, and moved closer to that city in Capernaum. However, Tiberias did not have as much to be built since it was existed already. It was already a city. It was a new city. It wasn't a new city to be built. Jesus then embarks on his new mission and reveals himself as the Messiah, the Son of God. And for this reason, I trust more historically the Matthew story of Jesus' childhood, whereby Jesus and Mary and Joseph, Jesus and Joseph, the family, escaped to Egypt, returned, but settled then in Nazareth, where Joseph would link work and sustenance for his family, Jesus and Mary, with a project in Zipori. However, look, nativity narrative is very important for our Christian faith. It follows what was prescribed by the scriptures, the circumcision after 8 days, the purification of Mary after 40 days, the purification of a woman who gave birth to a male child as prescribed. I mentioned in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1 to 5. You can read that when a male is born, she has to go 40 days and be purified in the temple, and she cannot enter the temple before. Later on, Jesus goes through the bar mitzvah when he's about 12 years old, which places him also like the son of the law, with the responsibilities like pilgrimage to Jerusalem for important Jewish festivals. And so at his first such pilgrimage, he was lost. Yes, we know he was lost, and then found by Mary and Joseph in the temple, teaching the scribes and teaching teachers of the law, as every boy who passed through the ceremony of the bar mitzvah, which is still practiced today in the Jewish religion, can teach others from the Torah, can read Torah and teach others from the Torah. That's why Jesus, 12-year-old, could teach. These are very valuable stories in Luke, but each one has a special message for us and makes Jesus stand out even as he went through the normal stages of boy's growth and development in the Jewish religious practices. So I will see you next week when we discuss the Matthean nativity narrative, which gives more prominence to Joseph rather than to Mary. So see you next week and enjoy the Christmas season blessing. Happy New Year when it comes. Blessing.